Hi everyone, this is Dr. Waters once again from Game Design Wit, continue our series of book reviews. And today we're going to talk about Level Up. And if you find that the cover is a little bit weird with some text that isn't in English, that's because this is the Portuguese version of it, Brazilian Portuguese. I bought this when I was on vacation and I saw it on the library. I was like, that's on the bookstore, and I thought, not bad. An interesting book on game design I haven't heard before. And now that I think of it, it's kind of interesting that I bought a book on game design and read it during my vacation, which explains why my wife was mad at me at that moment. But then again, this series is more than just about learning about game design. It's about learning about yourself. Without further ado, let's talk about Level Up. This book is not bad. It's okay. I've read bad game design books. Believe me, we'll cover those later. But I'd recommend this book for the average game designer out there, the individual. I would recommend it more for the artistically inclined individual because it talks a lot about form and function and level design and how things get put together. And, in the beginning, it starts off like a lot of game design books do, which is like, how is the team structured? There's this creature called the programmer. You have to talk with him. You have to convince him to do the things that you would like to be able to have in the game. Otherwise, they will not exist. Goes over those. But the interesting thing about this book is that in the middle of it, it actually every now and then sort of carves out like one or two sentences that are like words of wisdom. It's things that it's kind of useful. You kind of like, oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, like kind of but it's nice to have a book that sort of re-emphasizes those things as you're sort of going through. One of my favorite ones, which is kind of, as the author eloquently puts it, walking is not gameplay. So a lot of games where you're trying to go from point A to point B, if you're just, as a designer, you're just creating a map and you're having the player go from that point A for point B and you're just walking, that's not fun. That's an activity, right? The way that and there's 100,000 million ways in which you can break that pattern and actually make it into an engaging experience, right? So, for example, you could have simple obstacles on the way. Very simple things that force the player to think, I'm going to jump here, or I'm going to have to open this door. Or maybe you have to force the player to think where they're going to have to walk, like the original Dragon Quest series was. It's pretty much a walking simulator with battles and leveling up here and there. I do love Dragon Quest. But it's interesting how a lot of the gameplay mechanics is figuring out where you got to go next, in that series. But it's like, that's just one sentence, one word wisdom that it just throws out there. Another one, which I found was very eloquent. I saw it put out in different ways. But I think one of the most interesting theories that this book proposes, and I can kind of see why it holds up, is he sort of has this triangle of, okay, if you're trying to construct either a game, you're going to have to deal with characters in that game, you're going to have to deal with the world about that game, and you're going to have to deal with the gameplay mechanics that you have in that game. And what he proposes is you can only really alter or mess up one of those. If you mess up or alter or play around too much with both of them, it can get really complicated, and I think the average user wouldn't be interesting. So it's like, okay, characters will be elves, the world will be orcs or whatever, and the gameplay activities, you could make something like Puzzle Quest, like you're mixing a Bejeweled scenario with that kind of activity. But if you're allowed now, it's like, okay, it's Bejeweled and it's the same gameplay mechanics of Puzzle Quest, but you're dealing with characters that are the Hobble Trouble clan tribe from outer space, with their horns that come out of their eyes. You're like, okay, what? So that might actually be an interesting character for you to explore. But the idea that he's highlighting is like, choose your battles, right? Because I actually see some designers early on in the beginning, they're trying to change everything. They're trying to be like, being original everywhere is, the how you can measure yourself as a designer. It's not really that. It's where you choose yourself to be original, where you choose to play around with the rules and so on and so forth. So that was also an interesting piece of advice. And at least I don't concur with it fully. I think you can break that pattern, but the more you break that particular pattern of choosing between characters, gameplay, and world, is the more skilled you have to be as a designer. You need to really know what you're doing as you're constructing those worlds, as you're constructing those characters, and so on and so forth. As a matter of fact, I think one of the best ways for you to assess the skill sets of a designer is not how they break it, but when they break it, and how they sort of develop those characters. So I kind of like BioWare, for example, where they got the elves in Dragon Age, and they sort of used the elves, which was a historically associated with magic and so on and so forth in their world, but it's a race that are basically slaves, right? So they're also mixing social commentary. They're also playing around a little bit with our expectations of that. That's fun, right? And it was well written, and it fit in with that world well. And the mechanics aligned with that kind of stuff as well, as you sort of played around and tinkered around with that kind of stuff. Elves tend to be rogues, or in that kind of world. It's interesting. There's also other, bits and pieces of advice, like, talking about the HUD, locations, peripheral vision, when you're putting content in there. It talks about the types of enemies, an enemy that's a boss, a mini boss. Just goes over the basics, And so, if you are interested in game design, and, like, as some friends of mine find themselves to be able to work with games, but never have been themselves, hardcore gamers playing all the time, I actually recommend this book. It kind of helps you brush up on, like, the basics on a lot of different areas, and a lot of words of wisdoms that sort of allow you to understand and communicate with other designers and other people, and be able to, more importantly, learn what they have to say, and as well as being able to communicate yourself, in a language that allows them to understand what you're trying to say as well. And it just goes over that, at length about, it talks about the 3 C's, the cameras, control, and characters, and how those map, and so on and so forth. But it talks it at a high level, It doesn't go as in depth, for example, as a book like Game Feel, that talks about, okay, how do controls really map to how you feel about that game. It's like, why is jumping on Mario so much fun compared to jumping on another game? What's in there that actually ticks that boxes? This book sort of talks at a high level, but doesn't go in depth in each one of those. So it feels like a cooler version of Rules of Play, more down to earth, more practical. It's like less theory, like, this is how you make a game. It's like, you need to think about the angles, you need to think about that, and you need to think about the camera. Lots of, check boxes and lists that you got to go through, as well as highlighting, just words of wisdom by a designer that's worked with this kind of stuff at length. Talks about UI, clutter, all that kind of stuff. So it's a good book. I recommend it if you're trying to have, it's also a very easy read and fun. It's not as obtuse to read as some other books I've read in the past, so you can actually get a kick out of it and enjoy it, even if you're on vacation. All right, well, that's Level Up for you guys, or gals. If you have any other books you'd like me to review, or anything else. Oh yes, this was a recommendation by Creepy Pie. Once again, Creepy Pie, we meet again. And we'll likely meet again. That's normal nowadays. There's no such thing as not being able to meet a person in the digital era. But you get my drift. Anyway, drop down a comment below, subscribe and like and share with your friends. I hate having to do this, at the end of each video. But the problem is that it actually works. I've measured the analytics on the videos where I don't say that versus the ones that I do, and I have more subscribers on the videos where I'm like, subscribe and like and share and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it's nice to have another one of these. I was in hiatus because I was on vacation. Got a little bit of tan. Everyone's been saying that. Also, I cut my hair. And I've been losing weight. Why am I saying these things? I don't know. Life is an eternal mystery. And a journey. I have no idea what I'm doing. Actually, I do. I like being pranky like this. It's nice to feel at ease. In the first videos, I was... You know what? I'm going to rant. I'm just going to say what comes to my mind right now. And it's kind of funny, like, in my first videos, I was so uptight. I was like, this is game design, and you have to think about this, and axis of power in Mario, and blah, blah, blah. I was really nervous, because I was like, I don't know who's going to see this. The funny thing is, I think the more calm I am, and the more natural I feel, Like the more pleasure I actually get by making these videos, and I think that because I think I just get more authentic. Like I'm a goofy guy. I like talking about game design in goofy ways. Because we're talking about games. If we're not having fun while we're doing it, then I think it's unlikely we'll have fun while we're playing. And that's my thoughts. You take care.